before you start pursuing happiness, you should really be clear on what happiness even means to you, right? Like what makes you happy, because otherwise you're probably pursuing somebody else's model of happiness. And there's a good chance that may not be very fulfilling for you, right? And so like mainstream media or the version of happiness that I tend to see kind of promoted the most is really this like pursuit of like pleasure, right? Just do whatever makes you feel good and avoid, discomfort. And that model of happiness is generally very often catastrophic.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is my friend Andy Garrett, who's going to help us to grow and thrive. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and bring balance to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. While you're there, you can sign up for a monthly email where I share the best articles I read this month, let you know about upcoming episodes, and share a little wisdom. You can also listen to coaching calls under the Coaching Calls tab. I also share the most interesting articles I read every week on Facebook at facebook.com/Richer Soul. And there's also a Facebook group where you can ask questions and interact with other listeners. I'm not sure who today's quote comes from, but it's been said many times in many ways. Most people overestimate what they can do in 3 months and underestimate what they can do in 3 years. That's evident today as we release episode 200. Wow. Big shout out to my audio engineer, Simeon. He has done an amazing job of making me and the guests sound amazing and creating a quality show. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for listening. I appreciate you spending time with me. Hey, can you do me a favor? Send me an email and let me know what you like best about the show. Feel free to ask me a question. If there's anything I can do to help you, let me know. When I started this, I had no idea where it would go. And it's been a fun and amazing journey. Thank you for joining me. We have some really, really cool episodes coming up. One of them is actually about the future and what it looks like. Before we do all of that, let's get back to last week's action step, which was to put a time in your day to write down your dreams and then start working towards them. We only have one life. I do that. It is the way I live my life. It's how I live. This for me is a dream life. It took a lot of time, though, to create that. And that's, I think, the step that we all struggle with is actually creating that. And today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about knowing your purpose, being clear, knowing who you are. We're going to cover our core themes on harmony that we always talk about on the podcast. Today's guest is my friend, and he's part of my mastermind group. He's a licensed psychologist and a life coach. Dr. Andy Garrett invested decades of his life into understanding and codifying the intuitive spiritual essence of authenticity. On this episode, Dr. Andy Garrett talks about his authentic growth blueprint, which will help you access the best version of you. Let's meet him and learn. Welcome to Richer Soul, Dr. Andy Garrett. It's great to have you join us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and it's going to be a fun conversation.
And I'm excited as well, too, and especially to learn from you. So we always start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
Yeah, that's a good question. Trying to go back and remember childhood, see what memories can I pull up? I don't remember. So growing up as a young kid, my parents got divorced when I was very young. And so my mom was thrust into kind of a single mom role pretty early. So I remember her working a lot. And I remember her, being able to buy a house, being able to support us. We lived very frugally, even though we did have access to some resources in the family. But, but it wasn't something that was talked about. There wasn't really any conversation. I don't remember my mom, worrying very much about money. My dad, on the other hand, he was very generous with money. But it was something that was elusive to him. So, if he had $20, he was happy to share it with you. He just, had a lot of roller coasters, but I don't remember them speaking to me about like budgeting. When I was in high school, I actually did open up my first bank account. And so I do remember, and that was back in the day when we had checks and we'd balance a checkbook. So I should amend my statement. It was in high school. And as far as school goes, now, granted, in high school, it's all a blur because I was a mess, but I do not remember getting any education at all in regards to saving or, how to get a job. I think that has changed a little bit from some of the teens that I talk to now, but I don't remember getting any education whatsoever.
And that's not outside the norm, especially years ago. They didn't really teach money, and they didn't always teach you how to get a job. I mean, they did have some home ec classes sometimes. And if you go back far enough, they used to teach you how to do the things that you needed for life. But at some point that disappeared from the school curriculum. And now it's hopefully coming back around, at least as far as the money side of it is.
I remember, I think the last class that they did driver's ed with, I missed it by one semester. And so they used to actually teach people how to drive at school. And they had a driver's ed curriculum, and I missed it by one semester. So I had to go and get driver's ed on my own. But I did learn how to type. I love to say that. And that is a skill set. I think I had 2 computers classes my senior year, and I spent most of the time goofing off, but I did teach myself how to type without looking at a keyboard. And I have to say that is a very valuable skill that I still have today.
Well, kids kind of learn that today by typing on their texting apps.
That's so true.
Right? They're forced to get better.
Thumbs.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's the thing, though. They type with thumbs, which is all good on the phone, but it doesn't work on a keyboard.
It's watching some of these the teens and the kids type. It's interesting. They're quick at it, but it's like really unorthodox. I learned they put something over the keyboard, so I couldn't look at it. I can't remember what it was. Like a little cardboard thing. And so I had to learn how to, put the fingers on the AS, DF or whatever it is. So anyways, yeah, it's pretty funny.
The world changes, and you've got to change the skills that you have to learn. You mentioned that childhood was a mess, or at least your high school years. What was that all about?
Yeah, so I was growing up as a child. I felt alone a lot. I mean, probably because I was alone a lot. It was Gen X. And so not only did I have single parents that were just doing the best that they could to, earn a living and do some type of self-care, and they didn't have a lot of bandwidth left over after that. So I certainly appreciate that. But I also think Gen X, there was the latchkey generation. So it wasn't uncommon for parents, to just allow kids to come home and, the key was hidden somewhere. And so, spend a lot of time. I actually think a lot of the helicopter parenting and the tiger parenting and all these terms that have come up with parents being like overly attentive and smothering in some regards is really a reaction to the Gen Xers who were left alone way too much. And so, that certainly was something I remember on Saturdays, I would go out to go play in the neighborhood, and I could be gone for anywhere from 2 hours to 10 or 11 hours. And I'm sure, and this wasn't bad parenting. This was, I think, very much the norm, certainly for our neighborhood and kids that I knew. But my mom would have no idea where I was at. At some point, dinner would come around and she had a really loud whistle. So she would whistle, and I knew that was my call to leave whatever I was doing and head home and get dinner. But in high school, I remember the very first day, the freshman year, and I went to a huge high school. There was like 5,000 students there. And I came from a really small feeder school. So we were like the small school feeding into the high school. And it happened to be that the kids that I was friends with from 8th grade, a lot of them played football. I was 6'1", 6'2" tall, and probably weighed about 130 pounds. I remember wearing a tank top one day, and my friend's like, "Oh, don't do that. That's not a good look for you." I could not put on weight for the life of me. So football was not an option that I was wanting to try freshman year. So I missed out on that social opportunity. And then the lunch I had on the first day of high school, none of the friends that I had the same lunch as I did. I think there was like 3 different lunches. And so I remember having to go and try and find some place to sit, and I had to go up to a random group of kids, of strangers, and ask them if it was okay to sit down and eat lunch with them. And I just remember feeling the shame, like feeling really this sense of like rejection. And I remember making an internal agreement with myself that day that I will do whatever it takes to have friends and be popular, really. And so that set me off on a path where my true north was approval, was just about, gathering friends. And I got good at it. I got good at shaping and molding myself into who I thought people wanted me to be in order to get friends. And I ended up going to all the parties and all those things. But interestingly enough, I'd be at these parties and I would feel more alone because, I talk about this sometimes with clients, that sometimes you have this conflict between your authenticity and your attachment, this desire to fit in and belong versus, desire to stay true to yourself. One, I don't think I really knew what being true to myself was back then. I mean, I did have certainly some values and some ideas of ethically who I wanted to be, but man, I sold those out very quickly for the sake of just wanting to fit in. And so, each time that I did that, I lost myself more and more. And so I felt, more internally dissatisfied, depressed, anxious. I think, in the DSM, there's anxiety disorders, and you've got things from social anxiety and panic attacks and obsessive compulsive disorder. And I'm pretty sure in high school, I may have checked off every single one of those boxes in the anxiety disorder family. So I just really was internally a mess. And so, I partied a lot and certainly did some self-medicating to just try and quiet all that internal noise. And so that's why I look back and say, who I am today and who I was in high school are wildly different people. And every once in a while, I'll run into someone that says that they went to the same high school as I did. And if I think they're even in the general time frame that I was there, like I pretty much start off by saying, I apologize if you knew me back then. But crazy enough, in senior year, they give away awards, most likely to succeed, all those different awards. And I don't know why they thought this was a good award or appropriate to give out, but there was actually a jailbird award, most likely to go to jail. And apparently I won that award in a landslide. Apparently it wasn't even close. So I walked around like a fool, right, with this big yellow ribbon on saying jailbird, feeling so proud of myself. And I remember my girlfriend coming up to me saying, "Take that off. What are you doing?" So to say that I was lost and it was a mess is probably an understatement.
So what changed? What happened next?
Yeah, great question. There was about 2 years after high school. My mom very much felt that if I could just get away from the social group that I was a part of, that I would be better. And so somehow in all this mess, I actually made it into a couple of colleges. And I went down to a school, a nice, beautiful school down in San Diego, Point Loma, but didn't last there long because, again, internally, you could change my external environment, but internally, my internal environment was just a complete mess. So there was 2 years after that where there was a lot of like trying to find myself in not very good ways. But my relationship with my grandfather was something that was always very special to me. He was a very successful man, but when I look back and think about, what his greatest success was, it was really who he was as a person. It was, how he valued relationships and how he poured into people and how he poured into me when I would spend time with him. And fortunately, we lived very close to him growing up, and actually spent about a year living with him while our house was getting remodeled. So I got a lot of time with him. It was one of the few places, maybe one of the only places in my life where I really felt valuable. I felt important just being myself. Like, I didn't feel like I had to put on an act. I didn't feel like I had to earn his approval. And I can't even begin to tell you, and maybe it's something you could relate to, but how powerful that is. When you feel that type of safety and security and trust, and you see someone that has such clarity in who they are, right, and what they value, and so it allows you the space to really explore, the truth of who I was. And so I had that foundation in me as a kid. And when I was just about 21, I really bottomed out. And there was a moment where I remember someone telling me I didn't have to live this way. And I remember having a dream that night of my grandpa, reaching out to me. I was like in a dark hole. And he's got this huge farm man that's, 6'4", and I don't know what he weighed back then, but he had hands, fingers the size of a banana. And so he reached out and he pulled me out of this hole. And I just remember feeling safe, and he was pulling me into the light. And so that next day I told my parents, I'm ready to make some changes. And so I really committed to changing my external environment. I got involved in as many therapy modalities as I possibly could, individual, group. We did fire walks. I did Indian teepee sweat lodges, and really the spiritual, when I got right spiritually is when things really, really shifted for me. But the influence of my grandfather and, the inspiration and the safety I felt around him was really the catalyst for me making the changes.
And I tell that a lot to parents, especially parents with little kids. They don't care about all the stuff you buy and everything that you give them. One of the things I learned is when they're little, the biggest thing they need is their emotional tank filled, which is safety. And that's why I think putting kids to bed and spending time with them, that's kind of that period where they get to refill themselves. And if you can do that at a young age, your kids learn to stand on their own, and you have to continue it all the way through. It doesn't stop, when they hit the teenage years either. They're still looking for that. And I think a lot of times parents don't always realize that. You mentioned spirituality. How did that specifically help you get out of the place that you were?
So I had really kind of spiritually, we grew up with a strong religious kind of spiritual foundation. My grandpa certainly, in his business card, he had this little leaflet thing, and in it on one side had the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, which is really a beautiful prayer about virtue. And on the other side, it had the story of the origin of his company. And then it had a free hamburger pass, as my grandpa's is Carl Karcher, who started Carl's Jr. And so you'd have a free hamburger or free meal pass in there. And he would pass those things out, to anyone and everyone. I think he passed them out to presidents, to a pope. He threw out a first pitch of the Angels game, and you could see on the Jumbotron him shaking hands with the baseball players. And they were pulling out of their hand and looking at, he'd left a business card, that card in there. And I remember at Halloween, he would give away the hamburger passes along with a king size candy bar, and there would be a line an hour long just to get there and get those. So there was a strong foundation of faith, and something that I saw, especially with my grandpa and my mom and to my dad to some extent, where they actually lived what it was that they were talking about. And but I very much felt like God, I can be transparent here. I felt like God had abandoned me in high school. And so there was a sense I had so much anger inside of me. And I remember going to Ohio, which is where my grandpa grew up on a farm. And he was kind of taking us to show us, where he grew up and the farm he grew up on and the church he went to and the school and all these things. And everybody was going into a church. And I kind of, at this point, was refusing to go into churches. But because it was my grandpa and because I cared about, he didn't put any pressure on me. but I just wanted to do it out of respect for him. And the minute I walked into the church, I felt this wave of grace like sweep over me. And it was so clear to me that it wasn't, God that abandoned me. It was I was running away. And so, from that point forward, I think I kind of surrendered, and I really started to find, a personal relationship. So in my own spirituality and, finding some amazing people that I think were just faith-based individuals that were so authentic and loving. I went to a great school at Concordia University is where I got my undergrad. I went to Azusa Pacific, which are both faith-based schools. And so I got a chance to really dive deep into understanding what I believe, why I believe it, and wrestling with some big concepts. There's an issue called theodicy, and that one really had me for a while, kind of all twisted up inside. Theodicy is like a theology of suffering. How can we explain God as being good and just when there's so much suffering in the world? And my desire to want to try and be able to explain that, it's funny, it actually really became a barrier to my growth. And my big takeaway from, all the reading that I did, and I did quite a bit of reading on this, I wrote several papers on it, was that I'm not supposed to understand, right? Like the more that I think I need to understand, what God is doing, the more distant I felt faith-wise. And so the ability to just trust and surrender has been something that continues to be a challenge for me. But the more I do it, it's amazing how my happiness goes up. And I really find that life just happens so much more organically and powerfully.
It's a journey, isn't it? There's no summit, so to speak, right? You keep learning, you keep improving, you keep trying, and you have to, we all struggle with the things from our past, and we just have to keep working at it. And they're never going to go away fully. I think they'll always haunt you there in that moment when you least expect it. But that doesn't mean it has to drive your life. So what made you choose to go into the profession you went into?
So I think part of the skill set that I had developed in becoming, making a lot of friends in high school, that ability to really read people and to be able to understand who they wanted me to be. It's funny that skill set, I think, actually serves me well in like the coaching and psychology, some of the counseling that I do. However, doing it in an inauthentic way is certainly not the goal, but the ability to really sit with someone and to be able to be really curious about them in a non-judgmental and open-minded way is something that I think I developed as a young kid, and in my desire just to make friends. And I found even in high school, so I'd go to these parties and I'd be hanging out with some of these like rough, popular kids, and somehow they would often, seek me out and open up to me. Like they would share stuff with me that they'd never shared with anyone. And so, I think there probably is a variety of reasons for why I developed that, but I noticed I just loved people. I loved going deep with people. I loved being able to create a safe environment where people could really be very honest and open. And then in grad school, the two professions that are the two majors I was really looking at was like English and psychology. I really love writing. That's something else that's a passion of mine. But I didn't really see like a career in that. And I didn't think I wanted to be a teacher. And so the more I really dove into psychology, I think some of that idea, the physician, heal thyself, there definitely was some of that involved of me wanting to really understand myself and in this whole process. But my love of relationships is I think really the most foundational aspect, and the impact my grandpa had on me. And then some of the counselors that I worked with that really helped me to get out of a dark place, like that desire now to want to give back to other people and to want to be able to create a relationship or give people a framework that can help them to have, their own transformation experience is something that is a huge part of my purpose and my passion now.
And we'll get to that in a few minutes because you do have a unique model that you use. But let's talk a little bit about some of the people you help today. You're in California. You deal with a lot of affluent people, and yet they're still not happy. What's up? What's going on here?
Yeah, but I'm sure you've seen some of the studies of the correlation between money and happiness. And what I don't remember what the exact number is, but like, the average number or amount of money that tends to correlate best with happiness is like a really surprisingly small amount of money. It was like $50,000 or $60,000, per year or something like that. So, I've heard people say that money, doesn't make you, necessarily good or bad. It just amplifies some of your characteristics. So if you are kind and generous, then you just have a bigger platform to be more kind and generous. But if you're unhappy and you're, I don't know, dissatisfied, you're selfish or whatever it is, it can certainly amplify some of those characteristics as well. The biggest thing that I see with my clients is I think just a real lack of clarity. Like, some of my clients are extremely good at what they do in the business arena. And so they have clarity on who they are and how to be successful, in that arena, but they don't have real clarity and they don't have a good framework for how to be successful at home, oftentimes, whether it be in their marriage or with their kids. And so it's like they have this compartmentalized success. I'm really good at work and I'm consistently, whether I'm getting promotions or I'm, seeing each year I'm making more and more. But at home, I'm getting feedback that I'm failing. And what I tend to see that people do in that moment is they either kind of, double down on spending more time at work because at least they're, they have certainty and they kind of feel good about themselves. Or sometimes they try and take their like CEO, business mentality and then kind of force it at home, which just tends to drive more of a wedge between them and their family. And so, what I do is to help give them a framework and to help them to really get clear on who they are, what their purpose is, guided by things like core values and, what they're intrinsically motivated to do and all these things, so that they have one set of core values that is guiding them in all areas. It like really simplifies everything in their life when they understand these 5 core values are true of who I am and what's important to me in the workspace, but it's also true of who I am at home. I think when you have one set of core values that is guiding who you are at work, and then at home, you're trying to shift into a completely different like persona, it's really difficult. It's taxing. And quite frankly, I don't think it's tenable. I don't think it's something that you can do over a long period of time and be successful with. And so the more that you can get internally clear on who you are and what's important to you, and then create relationships and a life that aligns with that, it's amazing how you can start to experience what I refer to as holistic success. And, again, I don't mean to keep pointing back to my grandpa necessarily, but I feel like he was a great model of that, where, here he was building a huge company that was growing incredibly fast. And he was a very, very hard worker, but he always made sure he made time for his faith in the morning. He was home every night for dinner with his kids. He had 12 kids, which is so crazy to me. I have like 50 cousins. And one of the things that's really neat to me is, my grandpa and I, especially after I kind of got healthy, we had about a 10-year span where I got to spend a lot of time with him with a much clearer head. And we really became best friends. We spent a lot of time and we got a chance to get really close. And I got a chance to write him a gratitude letter where I really kind of poured out to him, all the things he'd meant to me. And what was neat is that happened to get to him at a really difficult season of his life where he was having open heart surgery. Unfortunately, my aunt passed away in a tragic accident. His own company was in all kinds of turmoil and disarray. And so he gets this letter from me, and it was something that lifted him up at a time. And I remember, his ethics and his virtues and values, they stayed so radically consistent, even when he was in so much external chaos. And I probably respected my grandpa more at that point than any other time because he didn't change, right? He didn't suddenly become really negative. He didn't start treating people poorly. And that's powerful. So that gratitude letter, I found out later, is something that was so meaningful to him that he actually made copies of it. So he had one of them at his bedstand. He had one that he had at his office, and he had one that he always brought with him wherever he went. And I mean, even now, as I think about this, like, it gives me, chills and it makes me emotional to know that I had the ability to really, be so clear to him about what he meant to me And the fact that I was able to give back to him in a way that helped him through a tough time, knowing how much he helped me out, is something that gives me great peace, brings me a lot of joy.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, that to me is the circle of life. Things come around, they go around. You have to keep showing up and working at life. And throughout my corporate life, I was always shocked at that. I would always notice that most of the people who were getting promoted in our company or who were at the higher levels all had horrific home lives. And they were way out of balance. They didn't have any harmony. And I remember one conversation I had one time with my manager, and he said, be careful what you wish for. Everyone who I've promoted to manager is divorced. And I'm like, that's a terrible price to pay for a very small amount of money, in promotion. So you really need to know who you are and what your purpose is. And I find that most people can't answer that question of who am I and who do I want to be? What have you found?
I completely agree. And I can relate, I think that question, who am I? I think in the personal development space, I would say, who am I and what's my purpose are the two most important questions to be able to answer. I remember 2 times in my life where I was not forced, but had to answer that question, who am I? One time was in a philosophy course in undergrad, and another time was for a internship application. And I remember being so frustrated by that question. I was like angry that they asked it. I remember going down rabbit holes. I would start to say, well, I'm a student and I'm a son and I'm this. And I had no idea how to answer it. And it created so much internal, distress and frustration. That's one of the questions in my digital course, which I'm sure we'll get to, but that's like the foundational question. And I ask people at the very beginning of the course, and then I ask people to answer it again once they've gone through the material. And I can't tell you how many people tell me their answer to the first question, the first time around when they haven't done any of the material yet, is like, I hate this question. I have no idea how to answer it. And I refuse to answer it. And I think that avoidance of it, right? Uncertainty creates so much, I don't want to say suffering. We know that the way the brain deals with uncertainty is it recognizes it enhances an internal fear response, right? We tend to go to our amygdala, and it really shuts down our ability to problem solve, to be creative or innovative. And we become really rigid. And when we have internal uncertainty, to even understand who we are. And so, and that shows up in the way we interact with our spouses. It shows up in the way, we deal with business. If we haven't really resolved that internal question of who we are, what's most important to us, who do I want to become? How do I want to impact people? When you don't have answers for that, then each encounter, there's all this uncertainty. And when somebody starts to question you about, a belief, it's almost like your identity gets threatened, right? And then people dig their heels in and they start to argue and they start to fight and they start to see the other person as the barrier. Like, why aren't you accepting or, validating my truth? And all of a sudden it's amazing how much conflict internally and externally it creates when you don't have internal clarity.
And that's very true. And I think one of the reasons we struggle so much is nobody has an example of what that looks like. And so they don't even know where to begin. Can you recollect someone's who am I answer that's succinct and clear that kind of resonated with you?
I can. So the people that went through the course, as I say, I asked the question again at the end of the course. And the interesting thing that I do is to try and really, make this their answer as practical as possible. As I say that I want you to answer this question in under 60 seconds, right? There's a quote from Viktor Frankl that I really love. It says, between a stimulus and a response, there's a space. And in that space is your growth and your freedom. And how many times do people give away that space, right? They just instinctively, emotionally respond without really being intentional to say, what is the best response? What is consistent with my values? But if you can answer who am I in under 60 seconds, then you can really use that space incredibly effectively, right? Where, you have a conflict, your spouse is confronting with something, or you have a crisis at the workspace, and you're able to draw upon your answer to who am I almost immediately because it's so succinct and so simplified. And so it allows you to like pause for a few moments and then almost, naturally, authentically, organically kind of lean into a response to the crisis or the conflict that's consistent with who you are. So there's the foundation for the answer. I can give you my answer to the who am I question if that's helpful, or I can tell you, I know in my podcast, Curtis Honeycutt is someone that has done some of the course material. And I want to say his answer is like even 20 seconds. It's even shorter.
Let's hear it.
I don't remember verbatim, but
get close.
It's something along the lines of like, I am a child of God and I, live in who he is calling in, and pushing me to be in each moment. It was really faith-based. He's a really, I'm a huge fan of Curtis. He's a pastor, but he's also a businessman and he's writing a book and he's incredibly dynamic. And his answer was so simple. And it was just about, it was a very selfless response. It was about, showing up each moment in who Christ is calling him to be. So again, I know that's not verbatim, but it was real for him. It was incredibly clear. There was someone, we did a group call for the initial group that went through my course and had everybody answer that question that had finished that lesson. And I was surprised because I was like, man, are people going to actually be able to answer this in under 60 seconds? And several people had 30-second answers. Someone else had that each day I strive to live in, it was very valuable. I strive to live with integrity. I strive to be the best, that I can be, while also practicing self-compassion and recognizing that I'm a work in progress. I know that was somebody else's basic answer.
That was helpful. Thank you. I mean, because I think people need to realize that it is basic. Some people will be faith-based. Some people will not. And you have to be authentic to yourself of who you truly are. Which brings up the question, because I know you talk a lot about being your authentic self. What does authentic mean?
That's a great question, because I think authentic is one of those words that just gets so wildly overused and misapplied that it's almost rendered the word meaningless. And I really struggled to even use that word because of that. And so I am like on a mission to reclaim the power of authenticity. One of the things I did and really trying to get clear as I was putting the course together was to say, I did a dive into like the definition of authenticity. And then I looked at the etymology, like the root of the history of the word. And then I got with probably about 75, 80 people, whether it be friends, colleagues, clients, family members, mentors. And I asked them, what does authenticity mean to you? How would you describe what it's like when you're being most authentic? And I got their answers and I recorded them and I had a few follow-up questions. And I saw a remarkably consistent pattern that people described authenticity as about being who they were when they weren't afraid of judgment, when they weren't being driven by guilt or shame. It was the freest and truest expression of who they were, is when they felt most joyful, fulfilled, happy, and content. It was when they felt most selfless, when they felt most giving and connected and collaborative. It really is about being the truest expression of who you are, and about having inner clarity on answering those questions, right? I think authenticity has incredible self-awareness for understanding, here's my strengths, here's my weaknesses, here's my values, here's what I'm truly motivated by, and here's my intent behind that, right? I mean, and I know these are probably deep things to be able to answer, but in life, you want to be able to anchor yourself, right? There is so much uncertainty that's naturally going to exist, and especially right now in our current, climate. And so if you don't have a deep anchor of who you are and what your truths are, it's so easy to get swept up by, the various circumstances in life, by pandemics, by, economic uncertainty. And so, authenticity is when you're really rooted and you have inner harmony and inner clarity for what's most important to you, for, again, what you're motivated by, the type of ethical person that you want to be, the virtuous impact you want to have in the world. And I say that last one, it might seem weird to talk about ethics and authenticity, but I see a lot of people get caught in what I call tit for tat ethics, which is I especially see it with my kids, two young kids, where they are so into what is fair and what, the other one's doing. Well, I'm not going to brush my teeth if they're not brushing their teeth, and that same dynamic happens all the time in adulthood where, a husband says, I would be more emotionally attentive if you'd stop criticizing me so much, and then you hear the spouse respond oftentimes, well, I would stop criticizing you if you were more emotionally attentive and didn't deserve to be criticized. And that feedback loop, that can go round and round for months, years, and decades until it ultimately ruins a relationship, right? And that same thing where I'm not going to respect you if you don't respect me, right? It robs you of your freedom. It robs you of accountability. And you, in some regards, become a slave to what, like how people are treating you in your external circumstances. So the more that you can really say, I am a kind person, I am honest, I am collaborative, whatever you're willing to really kind of, again, put your foundation on. And I do this non-transactionally and unconditionally to the best of my ability. So even when my kids are being difficult, I'm going to strive to be kind, enthusiastic, loving, and forgiving, right? And I do it not because I am looking for approval. I'm not doing it because I'm trying to close a sale. I'm doing it because it's true to who I am and what is most rewarding and fulfilling for me.
And that's kind of in line with the theme of what we talk about here, which is number one, know your purpose, be clear on it. And number two, live your life in harmony. And that's essentially the same themes that you were talking about. Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. One of the things that we talk about sometimes, and I'm sure you have a lot to say on this, is how does money affect all of this? Because I've seen it a lot in marriages. Like one spouse will go out and blow some money on something that they wanted, and the other spouse then retaliates by blowing money on something they wanted that the other spouse doesn't like. And they go back and forth until they're broke. How have you seen money have an effect on this overall behavior pattern and the way that we work with our authentic selves?
Yeah, one of the themes or like the tagline of the work that I do is discovering your authentic identity, purpose, and community from the inside out. I mentioned the inside out part because authenticity and really your best life, your happiest life, and all those things should always start from the inside out, where you go inward first to really define these answers to these questions. Things like happiness, right? Before you start pursuing happiness, you should really be clear on what happiness even means to you, right? Like what makes you happy, because otherwise you're probably pursuing somebody else's model of happiness. And there's a good chance that may not be very fulfilling for you, right? And so like mainstream media or the version of happiness that I tend to see kind of promoted the most is really this like pursuit of like pleasure, right? Just do whatever makes you feel good and avoid discomfort. And that model of happiness is generally very often catastrophic. So, and that can certainly relate to money, where you're using money to try and create happiness. But if you don't really know what makes you happy, and you don't know who you are, there's a good chance you're going to throw a lot of money at things that aren't going to give you the ultimate outcome that you're looking for. And so I think the more that you can really start from a place of knowing what's most important to you, knowing what really is fulfilling to you, and having an intrinsically motivated perspective on money. So intrinsically motivated is about, I want to, build a business because it's what's important to me. It's consistent with the impact I want to have on the world or other people. It's what I want to get good at. And I want to like really master that. And the more I do it, it's deeply rewarding and fulfilling for me. And if I happen to make money doing that, well, that's amazing, right? Generally, this is where you're going to make your greatest amount of money and where you're going to have your greatest happiness and fulfillment. But oftentimes people pursue money as the ultimate goal, it's the primary goal. And so we'd call that an extrinsic motivator. And what tends to happen is, right, so I'm highly motivated to get money and I earn it, right? Let's say I get a huge raise. You get a big hit of dopamine for that. It feels really good and it feels really powerful, but that dopamine goes away and you don't have anything internally to really sustain that good feeling. And so you basically start craving more and more money, right? I need to earn more, I need to get more. And the amount of money that gave you that hit of dopamine in the beginning isn't going to give you the same hit of dopamine. So you have to make more and more money to get that same hit of dopamine. And if that sounds anything similar to an addiction, it's because it's the exact same, kind of model or formula. And so anytime you are chasing extrinsic motivators, there's a good chance that you're going to become dependent upon that thing to feel good about yourself or to get that good feeling. And extrinsic motivators, often we will start to pursue the quickest path to get there. And even if that means taking the low road, if it means cheating, if it means being unethical, right? In business, if you're giving off the message that we're all about profit and we're all about money, and that's what matters more than anything, people often will start to pursue the quickest way to get there. With intrinsic motivation, the only person that you really hurt by being unethical is yourself. So almost by definition, you're not going to steal from yourself. The only road is really the high road. It's like doing things, again, because they're most rewarding and fulfilling for who you want to be. So does that make sense?
It does. You have to get off the hamster wheel. Stop chasing stuff. Stop chasing the dream that you've been sold by all the commercials and ideology that's out there, because they're selling you stuff so that they can have their extrinsic motivations met and they can be wealthy and profitable themselves. And it creates that whole hamster wheel. We are a consumer culture versus the rest of the world. And you have to learn to say no and say what really is going to make me happy and get off of that wheel and go follow the path that you choose. So you have a very unconventional path for how you work with people. And what I mean by that is you do three things, which is kind of unique. You have a therapy model, which is uncovering patterns, beliefs, and experiences. But then you have a coaching model, which explores and identifies a compelling vision, which creates a powerful roadmap for a desirable future. And then you have a consulting model, which gives strategies and systems driven by core values. And I think it's the intersection of all three, probably, which allows you to have success with your clients. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I really, the nice thing is when I meet with a client or, I'm meeting with an organization or, with a family, whoever it is that might be I'm working with. And I really get a chance to kind of do an assessment right up front to say what is happening, what is their ultimate goal, what's the best pathway to get there, and what are the biggest obstacles and barriers right now to them making progress. And so it allows me to really be able to discern and evaluate where I need to enter into the relationship. And so, is there something from the past that is the obstacle or barrier, right? That, some injury or wound or something that happened that they just haven't been able to let go of. And so it keeps kind of replaying on a loop. And so there needs to be some type of corrective, like some healing or forgiveness or whatever it might be, so that, we can really release that past, which is, the whole kind of getting through these past injuries, wounds, beliefs, limiting beliefs, things like that is kind of what I refer to as the therapy model. And then, being able to really then create a powerful, powerful vision for the future that's incredibly clear. And then the consulting is really about entering in and being able to equip people by giving them the right tools and strategies and acting in a place of being able to offer, I've got over the years, I've developed quite a tool bag. And so giving resources and making sure, that I'm getting real-time feedback on how the particular tool that I suggested is working. And if that tool is not, the right tool, then recognizing I've got plan B, C, D, E, and F. And one of these tools is going to be the right one, right? Like it's kind of where the authenticity comes in, is there is no one size fits all formula, right? I've been doing this long enough, and I know you can appreciate this too, but no two families necessarily, there might be similarities, but the unique things that light one person up and the way it lights up someone else is different. And so being able to really step in and to help people find what is most true for them, and to find the tools that work for their specific experience and their specific history and, their specific character strengths. That's part of the fun part for me, is to really be able, it's like a puzzle, right? And being able to put these pieces together so that I can really find the pathway that's unique for that person that will allow them to go out and just absolutely have their best life holistically.
Just out of curiosity, what's the biggest struggle that you see that the kids are facing or come to you with?
It often is going to relate to sometimes the parents and what's going on at home. Like there's a great Abraham Maslow. If there is a psychology historical person that is like my, grandfather, that's not the right word, but Abraham Maslow, I love his thoughts, and he was like way ahead of his time. But he has a quote about, much damage is done to kids and adolescents through parents that don't have clarity on their values. And again, that's not verbatim, but that's the gist of what he says. When parents aren't really, really clear on what their expectations are, right, with what they value, or there's inconsistencies, they say one thing, but then they're doing something else. It creates all kinds of chaos for kids, right? It creates all kinds of internal confusion. What do they really want? What is it that makes mom and dad happy? If mom or dad is emotionally one time they're kind, and the next time they're mean, and the next time they're, laughing and joyful, and there's inconsistencies in how they treat the kids, also creates all kinds of internal anxiety and angst for kids. And so the more that parents can be really clear saying, this is what we value as a family. These are the character strengths we're going to help instill. This is what I'm doing as a parent to make sure I'm living in alignment with that. It's amazing. It creates so much certainty for kids. So it creates a platform where it's like, all right, at least here at home, things feel really stable. Nothing's perfectly stable, but I feel secure. And then I can go out into the world and, deal with all the uncertainty that exists again outside of the home, and social dynamics, and, dealing with the internet and all that stuff. And I know that at home I have just such clarity on, who we are as a family, what we value, what gets reinforced and what gets course corrected and all those things. So I have to start the answer off there. In addition, right now in particular, I see a lot of kids really struggling with this lockdown, and, because there's not really a clear end in sight. I just think it's dragging on. And again, the uncertainty and then all of the anxiety that causes is really taking a massive toll on a lot of kids' mental health. And, it hasn't happened with any of my clients in particular, but, I think we're seeing that suicide rates are at all-time highs. I know addiction is absolutely skyrocketing, and opiate use and overdoses. I've heard of, domestic violence and all these things. So we're in a really unique time in history with everything that we're going through. And I really hope that we, in our profession and, through opportunities like this, that we can do the best of our ability to equip families, parents, and kids with resources that will help them to bolster their resilience. Because I think they really need it right now. They need to have a model for how to process what they're going through and how to be able to move forward and not get stuck and overwhelmed, which then allows like feelings of helplessness, powerlessness, and hopelessness kick in. And that's when things can get really, really bad.
It's funny. Every time I read a psychology book, I'm like, this is a parenting book. All these people have problems because their parents messed them up. Parents should read psychology books so they don't mess up their kids and cause a lifetime of therapy needs. You've mentioned the course a couple times. Can you share a little bit what it's about and how it helps people?
Yeah, the course is called the Authentic Growth Blueprint. It's very an appropriate name because that's exactly what it gives you. I started to create it. I was actually working, a common friend of ours, Aaron Walker, and we were talking about business wise, what I could do to scale my business. And, the traditional model of scaling therapy or like a coaching practice is either just to take on more clients, to continue to raise my fees, or to take on a bunch of coaches that work underneath me. None of those models really sounded very appealing to me because all of them just require more and more of my time. And I already was working till often, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night and coming home after my kids and my wife were asleep. And that was awful. I really, really did not enjoy that. And so in the other issue, like raising my fees are already high. It doesn't feel good to sometimes have to, recognize that there's people that could really use my services that like can't afford. And so I wanted to really create a model where I could just impact more people. I could take tools that I know were having incredible results and be able to scale it where I could just impact more families. I could go into businesses and provide them with resources that I know would completely transform the culture of the business. And so I, again, looked at my grandpa and the example he set. I found some other, what I call authentic exemplars. And I really said, how are they living their life? And how can I deconstruct this? And so, I saw some patterns, that people that really have this authentic exemplars where they are incredibly successful in business and have a clear plan and have a great business. And then they also have really great family life and they're pillars of their community. Like, they spend a lot of their time in flow in all areas of life. Like, these are really energetic people. I met some of these people who were in their 80s and they had more energy than I did. I was like, holy mackerel, like, did you just have, a Red Bull or something? And getting a chance to really talk with them, I really did see, the things that line up with flow is intrinsic motivation. You're getting real-time feedback. Exactly, what it is that you're trying to do, and you're using your skills at just the right ability, right? The challenge at hand is not too easy. It's not too hard. You're stretching yourself just a little bit. And because they knew who they wanted to be, not only at work, but they knew exactly the impact and who they wanted to be in their role as, at home, as a parent, in their marriage, it was almost like a goal or a challenge, right? To rise up to be that. And so they experience flow in their relationships. And so I thought, all right, how could we create this, right? We understand the variables that create flow. So, my course helps people to get really, really clear on how to answer the questions. Who am I? What's my purpose? And it does it through 3 modules, right? It's really simple. Get really, really clear on your core values and then be able to implement them into your daily life, right? Your decisions get filtered through your core values. Your relationships, the people you do business with should be consistent. The people you hire should be consistent with your core values. And the more that you can implement your values into your daily life, like the research is really clear. It might be the single most powerful thing you could do to increase your well-being and your sense of self-worth. So once you've got that really, dialed in, we've got values vision boards, right? There's a stress mindset exercise where you integrate your values that is incredibly powerful, changes your relationship to stress. And then module 2 is all about intrinsic motivation. And there's a bunch of lessons in there, but the 2 lessons that I really love are your best possible self and a role crafting, where you just say, this is the activities that I most enjoy doing. And I have them do it in 3 different roles. So like I would do it as a husband, as a dad, and in my coaching business. And so I really write out, these are the things that I most, freely choose and enjoy doing. And then these are the types of interactions that I most want to have. I want to, feel enthusiastic. I want to impact my wife in a way where she feels that she is a priority to me. She knows that I will be influenced by her and be willing to change my mind. So I wrote that out. And then the last one, what is the mindset, right, that I want to have that really makes that role very purposeful? And so I see my role as a dad as kind of a coach, as being able to help my kids discover their authentic self, their authentic strengths. When I get clarity on how I want to show up in each of these roles, it's amazing how powerful it is to show up with that clarity then in that role. And I've shared my answer with my wife. And when I'm out of alignment, she will very quickly remind me and show me. And what's crazy is, in the past, if my wife criticized me, sometimes there was that sense of feeling, sensitive, insecure, and then, kind of responding out of that in a way that probably wasn't always my best response. But because these are things that I have freely said, this is who I want to be, I actually genuinely appreciate when she calls me out on this. And it's much easier for me to course correct on that. And I know everybody that's done that exercise has had a similar experience. And so it actually, I think, makes you more open to constructive feedback and more collaborative. So, and then the third module is all about getting really, really clear on what are your signature character strengths. And then what is the virtuous impact that you want to have on people? You want to, this is, I believe, where your superpowers come from is, using your character strengths, courage, creativity, humor, forgiveness, and then doing it intrinsically motivated. So I bring my courage to, my workspace or my relationship with my kids to have an impact of making them feel, loved and for them to face their fears. And I do it because it's who I want to be. And I feel a responsibility to do that, right? Much like Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And so when you line up those three things, here's my core values and how they show up, here's my intrinsic motivation and how it shows up in the different roles. And here's the character strengths that I use to express those and the virtuous impact I want to have. And then the module 5 is the blueprint. All right, you've answered these three things. What is your purpose statement in a single sentence? What is your 60-second who am I answer? What are the habits that you want to create, right, that align with your identity, your why? And then what is like a credo? There's several other exercises, but what is like 5 principles, questions that you can ask that will guide all your decisions that align with your answers to these? And we launched this course in beta mode, literally, I think it was like on March 15th, right when the whole country went on lockdown. And so it's certainly an interesting time. I had kind of a captive audience, but there also is a tremendous amount of uncertainty. However, everybody that finished the course in the middle of this pandemic is absolutely crushing it. They have never been more clear with what their purpose is, right? They are rising above these challenges and all this uncertainty. And several of them are saying that their marriage, and some of them were in a good place in their marriage going into the course, but their marriage is in the best place it's ever been. Their business is growing and they're pivoting sometimes to, making their business even more fulfilling and making it more consistent with their purpose and identity. And so, I interviewed Curtis, who I know I referenced before, and asked him, hey, since you did the course, what have been the results? And he's an abnormal one, but he's like, I ran a marathon. So I was like, wait, you ran a marathon in the middle of the pandemic? I was like, they didn't have like a group marathon. He said, no, I've always just wanted to run a marathon. I've always had excuses for why I didn't do it. He's like, it was clearly aligned with my values and what I'm intrinsically motivated to do. So he's like, I just told my wife one day, like, pick me up in 5 hours. So he just got out and started running. He ran a marathon. So not that I think that's a great idea, and certainly not what I'm intrinsically motivated to do. But, he got a promotion to his dream, the job that he's always wanted. He started his own business. He turned away clients that were willing to pay him money because they weren't aligned with his values. And then he ended up getting clients, even better clients that were a perfect fit. And his business is growing really. I know some of the people he's working with, and people are loving what he's doing. His marriage is in an amazing space, and he became a dad in all of this too. And he was like, I have such clarity for the type of dad I want to be. Right. And I just think, again, when you reduce that internal like confusion and you don't really know how you want to show up, and you replace that with radical clarity and harmony, and then you just align your day-to-day actions with that, it's really your authenticity is on the Maslowian hierarchy of self-actualization. I am convinced that authenticity is at the very tip top of that self-actualization pyramid.
And that's true. When you know what you want, life becomes so easy. We always like to ask, what is an action step people could take this week to move forward?
This may not seem like the easiest thing to do, but I think the most powerful thing you can do is to clarify your core values. I think really getting clear on that. And there's like a super simple exercise. It's a journaling exercise that you do for 10 minutes. And you just simply say, these are my core values. This is what they mean to me. And this is how I want them to show up in my day-to-day life. And Kelly McGonigal, who is a Stanford professor and has written some amazing books, I'm a huge fan of hers. She has a quote in her book, Upside of Stress, that exercise might be the most effective psychological intervention that has ever been studied. And they've replicated this over decades. And they consistently see that it enhances self-worth. It stops rumination, unhealthy rumination. It helps you to rebound from stressful events. It improves your health, improves your job performance. It makes you happier. Anyways, it goes on, more connected, engaged, loving. And this is just doing that exercise one time for 10 minutes. So if you got 10 minutes to spare, write about your core values, talk about what they mean to you and how you want them to show up in your daily life, and enjoy the benefits from that.
And that's pretty simple and doable, and everyone's got 10 minutes. So there is no reason you can't do that. It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
I think, again, it's really the more I can come from an intrinsic motivation place. I think the more that I get focused on extrinsic motivation, I get focused on other people and comparing myself to other people. And I get jealous sometimes of other people's success.
The only person we should compare ourselves is to ourselves and making ourselves better.
Love it. Yep.
What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
That life is best experienced from the inside out, right? I spent so much of my life trying to find happiness and success and significance outside myself, through other people, through accomplishments, through education, through all these things. And it never gave me what I was looking for, but I went internally that I found all the answers.
And that's true. You can't chase other people's dreams, right? You got to chase your own. You got to know what they are. Otherwise, you climb the wrong mountain.
Beautifully said.
If you were to give an 18-year-old one specific piece of wisdom, what would it be?
I would say to really define, similar to what I just said there, is to really try and live their life from the inside out. And obviously I'd have to define what that means to them, but, to find their self-worth and happiness. I love with 18-year-olds, the more they can find why things are important to them, I feel like that it can be a game changer, right? Like at 18, they've been told by school, this is what you should do. Schools value conformity. And so if kids can figure out why learning is important to them, or why, earning money is important to them, that's tied to their values, man, it is a game changer. You'll see their motivation, their initiative. Kids that parents thought were lazy, when they suddenly figure out their why, are not lazy at all.
It is a game changer. And honestly, they should spend their entire senior year just working on figuring that out and forget about everything else, because it's a life-changing accomplishment. If people would like to find you, learn more, and maybe be interested in buying your course, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, right now, certainly my website at ag-thrive.com. I'm on social media. So you can find me on, I think, AG Thrive at AG Thrive on Facebook. And then the course right now, we are making a few revisions. So I will have a link. So if I could send that to you, it should be ready in the next week. And I'd love to offer an exercise. It's what I'm doing right now to help me through the pandemic. And it's what I'm sending a lot of my clients. And it's really, really simple. I really break it down, but it's called a benefit finding exercise. And it's just simply, what do I have control over right now? And how do I really focus on that? How do I try and release and let go of the things I can't control? Because the more you focus on that, it will shut you down and get you really, really stuck. And then how might I benefit, or what can I possibly, is there a character strength I can learn or build in this time right now? Becoming more resilient, becoming more creative, whatever that might be, to help me grow through this challenging time. And then is there some way that I could use that to serve others? That benefit finding exercise, it's actually, I discovered it through veterans that had experienced trauma, and it transformed their trauma instead of PTSD into post-traumatic growth. And they've since used that same exercise in a variety of different ways, where it gets consistently amazing results. And again, the more you focus on what you have an internal locus of control over, and then use that to actually grow, it will help you to rise above all of the uncertainty and challenges and, everything that's going on right now. So I have an exercise for that.
And we will put all of that in the show notes so that everyone can find it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Rocky, I had so much fun. And I'd love to create that curriculum. You said that senior year, developing your whys. So, hey, I'm in. If you're in on that, let's make a senior year curriculum for kids.
Let's definitely do that. That course of his sounds amazing. What would it mean to you to have clarity? to be able to answer the question of, who am I? Define your best possible self and the life you want to live. Do you have clarity? That's our action step. Clarify your core values. Next week, Josh McCallan is joining us to talk about building a soul-based business. And he's going to share the core values of his business, and it's how he hires and how he does things. I just want to say thanks again. We've completed episode 200. I've got a bunch more on the way. It's been a great journey. I'm glad you were here to join me on this. I'd love to hear from you and how you're doing. If there's anything I can do to improve, I'd love to hear that too. It's Rocky@richersoul.com. I do read all your emails. Have an abundant week.